Hello and good day. Nice that you have turned on. Today we are talking about the statue of Daniel. I said that the statue of Daniel from the bronze belly, which represents Alexander the Great, to the toes is a completely Greek sequence. I have displayed the statue here for you to look at. To be precise, from Alexander the Great, through his 4 Diadochi kings, down to the feet, and finally to the toes, it's an Alexandrian-Diadochian-Seleucid-Syrian sequence that goes all the way to the Decapolis. I have already made a video about this, therefore I will not go into it here in detail. But what I would like to add is the following. Those who support the Rome theory have often said to me that the legs, if they were really Greek, and so following Alexander the Great, they also would have to be made of bronze. For Alexander the Great stands symbolically the bronze belly in the statue. Alexander the Great is a Greek, and therefore symbolized in the statue by bronze. If the Diadochi were also Greeks, then the legs would also have to be made of bronze, as Alexander was. This objection cannot be completely dismissed. The supporters of the Rome theory say the legs are Rome, but that is a different empire than that of Alexander the Great, and therefore the legs are made of iron. But it is historically wrong to claim that Alexander the Great was followed by the Roman Empire. It is wrong, and Daniel does not show that either. Daniel does not mention Rome anywhere, and Alexander the Great was demonstrably followed by the Diadochi kings, Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus and Ptolemy. This historical sequence shows that the Roman Empire cannot be assumed here. Alexander the Great was followed by 4 of his generals. For the 4 generals, the 4 thighs stand, because in Daniel it says, his thighs of iron. In Daniel 2, this statue is explained, because Daniel interprets the statue to Nebuchadnezzar, and he says, his thighs of iron. A statue has 4 thighs, 2 strong thighs and 2 weaker thighs. The 2 strong thighs were Seleucus and Ptolemy. The 2 weaker thighs were Cassander and Lysimachus. So this fits perfectly. And the reason why these thighs are made of iron and not of bronze, like Alexander the Great, is simply that these 4 generals are meant. But they were not descendants of Alexander the Great, but strangers. It also says in Daniel, his kingdom is given to strangers. These 4 generals were not descendants of Alexander the Great, but strangers whom he had appointed as generals. Alexander himself had no children. He was married to a Persian princess who was pregnant by him. But when he died, the 4 Diadochi divided the empire of Alexander the Great among themselves and killed the princess and her child, so that they became successors of Alexander the Great. So they were not descendants of him, but strangers. And that's why the metal changes. I think it is quite understandable to leave it all in the Alexandrian-Diadochian-Seleucid-Syrian sequence, because that gives us the opportunity to see Daniel from Daniel 2, from the still to the end, to Daniel 11 in a consistent sequence. That's very important, and something that I don't think can be easily dismissed. I've done a couple of videos of this as well. This is the reason I wanted to add why there is a change from bronze to iron, although Alexander the Great and his successors were all Greek. The reason is simply that the 4 generals who historically followed Alexander the Great were not his descendants, but strangers, and therefore a new metal is chosen. This line of the Diadochi kings, especially of the 2 Seleucid and Ptolemaic dynasties, then goes in the statue down to the feet and down to the toes, because in the end times 2 of these 4 Diadochi kings arise again, and amazingly in the shape of the 2 feet, which consist then conclusively also again of this material iron, like the thighs. These 2 are the today's Egypt and today's Syria. That means that the Ptolemies and the Seleucids will suddenly arise again in the end time. They are the 2 feet, smaller than the historical Seleucids and Ptolemies and weaker. But exactly they will come again. These 2 feet, today's Egypt and today's Syria, exist again. They are approximately just as old as Israel. Israel has now become 70 years old, and also Egypt and Syria are each about 70 years old, as we see them today in their current shape. Egypt, of course, is thousands of years old, but the present state of Egypt is about 70 years old, and so is Syria. These both will rise again in the end times. And also will come this 10-horned empire in the end times, the Neo-Decapolis. And then the statue is complete. This is the reason why these 4 thighs are made of iron, and the 2 feet are made of iron too. But the feet and the teeth are mixed with clay in the end times. This is also a very interesting picture, because I've never heard anyone preach about what the clay really is. It's always just said the iron legs, which are actually not legs but thighs, represent the Roman Empire, and that is weak, and that is why there is clay mixed in there. But I think it's different. I believe that an end-timely Seleucid, or at first a Seleucid-Ptolemaic empire, which is later ruled by the Seleucid king alone, that this end-timely empire is mixed with Israel, and that the clay stands for Israel. For we have a rock that strikes the statue to the feet. This rock comes from a mountain. And we have the clay. So we have metals and we have earths or rocks. We have gold, silver, bronze and iron, and all these are metals. But we have more. We have a mountain, we have a rock, and we have the clay. The mountain, the rock and the clay belong together. The rock is Christ. He destroys the statue and then sets up his worldwide kingdom. This rock comes from a mountain. The mountain is God's kingdom, and his people is the clay. It is Israel. And Israel is mixed with these end-timely structures, the 2 end-timely Diadochi kings. This is because the Antichrist makes a covenant with the many, namely with the north of Israel, because then iron and clay will be mixed together. But they will not stick to each other. Why not? Because the clay, as soft and as weak as Israel is, compared to its rock Christ, will not stay together with the end-timely anti-Christian kingdom, but Christ will come again, will set up his worldwide kingdom and take his people to himself again. Therefore, iron and clay do not stick together. In this way, the view shown here is comprehensible. Whoever is interested in this, please have a look at the clips about Daniel, who is the Antichrist. In addition, there are 24 clips, which are quite interesting, even if they show a completely new view, which is quite different from what we are used to. So much in a nutshell. The change of metal from bronze to iron is due to the fact that Alexander the Great's successors were strangers, not his descendants. I thank you very much for listening, wish all the best, God's blessings, and see you soon.